I'm going to make 10 of these V8 emblems using the sand casting process. I'll show you how I do it. This is the pattern that I'm going to be using today. It's a cast urethane on plywood. Pretty durable pattern. I make a lot of molds with this. It's recessed on the back and it's got the gating included. Have to sandwich it between the two halves of the flask, which is the top, which is called the cope, and the bottom, which is called the drag. Blow it off so there's no extra dry sand on it. I'll riddle the first layer of sand over it so it gets any little dirt clods or junk out of there that would make pits in the casting if it was up against it. That air rammer will ram the first layer of sand up tight against the pattern. Later on I'll squeeze it so the whole thing is compacted. Setting the bottom board with a little rubber mallet like that keeps loose sand from falling out when I roll it over. I'll blow off the pattern so there's no loose dry sand up against it that'll fall off. The sand's got a little bit of a moisture content so it sticks together. Once again, I riddled that first layer of sand. This video is sped up to about 3.5 times the speed, otherwise you'd fall asleep watching it. Just in this section where I'm ramming the mold. This will compact the whole mold together, make everything tight. Squeezing it like that. This is a hollow brass tube that I'm shoving down into the sand. It creates the channel for the metal to get into the mold. You can hear the vibrator rattles the pattern when I drop it. That keeps the sand from sticking to it. Blow it off so there's no loose sand on there, and then close it up. Now I've got a mold that I can pour molten aluminum into. I'll take that flask off of the mold and it'll leave that nice chunk of sand. Then I'll make another one. I've got to make 10 of these in order to get 10 castings. Here the mold's all ready to go. The pouring basin. It's shaped like that to keep the metal from going down the sprue too fast. Today I'm using scrap aluminum. I don't normally use scrap because I don't know how it's going to react. These aren't getting machined, and it's getting expensive to buy ingots. I've doubled in the last couple of years. Actually more than doubled. This saw cuts them up pretty good so I can get them into my crucible. This is sped up a little bit too, but it still cuts through there faster than you'd think. It's a metal blade. I put a little bit of wax on it to keep it from loading up. The properties of various alloys of aluminum are all really different when you go to cast them. Some of them will flow in a mold better than others, and you don't know what kind of characteristics the aluminum is going to have once it's cast. Some is very machinable and some of it's just gummy and very flexible. So it's hard to know when you're using scrap metal what it's going to do. But for these things, it's just not going to matter. I used all the wheels from the same set. I actually melted 4 of them. You can see 3 here. But that way there's no weird alloys in there that'll change the properties too drastically. I think these are forged wheels. They may end up like a 6061 alloy, which is not really a casting alloy, but once again, it doesn't matter in this particular situation as long as it fills the mold and it looks good. This bandsaw, I'm breaking down the wheels just a little more to get them in my crucible. I'll sandblast the rest of that fluffy dirt off of there and get them fairly clean, although they'll still have a little bit of paint and varnish on them. They're ready to go in, ready to be turned into something else. I've got to be careful when I'm loading the crucible so I don't break it, or so the metal's not wedged in there when it heats up. If the metal is wedged in the crucible, and when it heats up, it'll expand and break it, or it can. These crucibles were about $400 when I bought them, and they're probably $8 now. This stuff's gotten just out of hand lately. So that's a shot of some metal preheating on top of the furnace. I turned the lights off so you could see down in there. I don't normally pour in the dark. So that's argon gas I'm bubbling through the melt. There's probably 80 pounds of aluminum in the furnace. I didn't melt it all in one shot. It wouldn't have quite fit in there. It was 4 wheels or a little over 100 pounds. So that gas will bubble through the metal and catch any hydrogen and float impurities to the top. Works pretty good for keeping the porosity down, getting clean metal. So I've already poured most of the castings. This is just the last 2. That whole crucible will hold about 20 pounds of metal, and the castings, these take about 10 pounds. So I can't fill it all the way up to the top and get 2 at a time, otherwise I'd spill it all over the place. No fun picking up little chunks of aluminum. And that is the last mold. Pouring these things is actually, you got to be real careful. You don't want to interrupt the pour. If you get air down in there, it'll cause bubbles. So there they are. They're ready to shuck out of the mold, out of the sand. Probably been only sitting for 20 minutes, but some of them have been sitting longer than others. And the metal actually solidifies really quickly in the molds. It can still be somewhat elastic if you don't wait long enough. You certainly don't want to touch it. It's probably 600 degrees still. The good thing about casting in a snap flask like I did, they shuck out really easy. Just knock them on the floor and it falls apart. So there's a pile of hot V8s. I'm going to let them cool off a little bit before I finish knocking them out. This is actually the next day. I didn't have to wait that long, but now I can handle them at least. A few taps with a hammer and all that loose sand comes right off. I add a little bit of moisture to the sand and I can use it again. Totally recyclable, which is pretty cool. So here I'm cutting the gating off. I try to do it real carefully because I don't want to cut into the casting and I don't want to leave too much extra gating for me to have to grind off later. Besides, I like to move slower on this saw. I enjoy having fingers. Cutting the last little nibs off the back is a little bit challenging. You just kind of got to get it positioned in the right spot and go slow so you don't overcut. Not a big deal if you undercut, but then you'd spend a lot more time grinding. get positioned to get that last little nib cut off of there. So there's a pile of them, 10 of them, gating cut off and ready to go to the next step. I'll do a little bit of grinding on them to get the last little bit of gating off of there and a little bit of flash. And then I'll sandblast them, actually shot blast. I've got a stainless steel shot that I use that works pretty well. The one on the right's been shot blasted. It kind of gets that oxide layer off, that shiny oxide layer, and smooths everything out and makes it look uniform. But overall, it's a pretty nice appearance. These parts turned out really well. And thank you for watching.